Alan Dershowitz is here, and I want to ask you, Alan, maybe I've missed this, but they're not accusing him of abuse of power, are they? They're saying that he refused to acquiesce to Congress.
Well, there are two articles of impeachment. The second is obstruction of Congress, and that's just a false accusation.
It's a separate branch.
It's a separate branch. The president's entitled to leave it to the courts to decide whether or not members of the executive have to comply with subpoenas. But they do also charge him in the Ukraine matter with abuse of power. But abuse of power was discussed by the framers. It was given as a reason why we should have impeachment in the Constitution at all. But then when it came to coming up with criteria for impeachment, the framers refused to include abuse of power because it was too broad, too open-ended. And in the words of James Madison, who's the father of our Constitution, would leave presidents to serve at the will of Congress. And that's exactly what the framers didn't want, which is why they were very specific and said a president can be impeached only for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are crimes. And according to Blackstone, whose book was the most influential one at the time, a misdemeanor is a species of crime.
We think of it now like jaywalking, but that's not what it was meant at the time.
No, misdemeanor. In fact, at common law, there was such a thing as a capital misdemeanor. A person could be executed. For example, if somebody shot the king's deer in the King's Park, that would be regarded as a misdemeanor, but he could lose his head over it. It's just that his blood wouldn't be tainted, his family wouldn't be suffering, but because it wasn't a felony. But thus misdemeanors could be very, very serious. They also included things like maladministration, but the framers explicitly rejected. There was actually a vote on maladministration, and it went down, I think, 9-2 or something like that. And then the person who offered that amendment withdrew it and substituted high crimes and misdemeanors. I've now read, I think, every word of every framer debating impeachment. And I've also, of course, read the Federalist Papers, and I've read the statements made by the lawyers in the trial of Andrew Johnson. And I think I'm pretty well prepared to help inform the senators. Jeffrey Toobin seems to think somehow it's a sin for me to be presenting my case to the Senate because I'm not involved in every aspect of the trial. Very often I come into a case as of counsel on the constitutional issues, and I don't get involved in the day-to-day issues in the case, but I just present on the constitutional issues. And that's precisely what I'm doing in this case. It's consistent with what I've done in many, many other prior cases, and there's nothing unusual about it. But, you know, people don't want to address my arguments on the merits. What they want to do is attack me personally. And that's what's happened in this country. Everything's become a personal attack. People won't talk to me. People won't engage with me because they think I'm representing the devil and I'm the devil's advocate.
And you are still a liberal Democrat.
A liberal Democrat.
Right. I mean, it's not,
yes.
It's crazy. All right. Let me ask you on abuse of power. If they're charging abuse of power in the Ukraine, they're saying basically that he was trying to withhold money, et cetera, et cetera. But how can you prove that without going into what the president was concerned about on the abuse of the Ukrainians through the State Department, through our embassy in 2016, and also the use of our money being laundered and shipped back to Hunter Biden? How can you possibly make this case without going into what the president said? I need you to look into these things.
Well, I think there's a fair point for that. And if witnesses are called by the Democrats, obviously witnesses will have to be called by the Republicans. One of the issues will be when the president said on the telephone call to the president of the Ukraine, I need you to look into whether or not there was an investigation of Hunter Biden. We have to see, because remember, we do have a conversation between Joe Biden, who I like, and who I've known for many, many years. But there is that conversation in which he said he told the Ukrainians that unless they fire the prosecutor, within 6 hours, the money will be withheld. Now, the question is, was that prosecutor corrupt? Should he have been fired? Was he looking into Hunter Biden?
Was that abuse of power?
That will have to come up.
Right.
And that will have to be, look, I don't think abuse of power is a constitutionally impeachable offense, regardless of who does it. I don't distinguish between Democrats and Republicans. But I think that all these things would have to be looked at, and the trial would be interminable. It would take forever if witnesses are called. But if that's what the Senate wants, excuse me, they have the authority to do it because they make the decisions.
So wouldn't abuse of power be like what Nixon was doing, using federal agencies for his own? Wouldn't abuse of power be Barack Obama with the IRS, or his administration with the IRS?
Well, with Nixon, he committed crimes. At least he was accused of committing crimes. That is, paying hush money to witnesses. He was accused of telling his associates to lie to the FBI, of erasing a tape. All of those would be criminal if they could be proved, whereas what's alleged against President Trump is not criminal. If they had criminal issues to allege, you can be sure they would have done it. If they could establish bribery or treason, they would have done it. But they didn't. They instead used this concept of abuse of power, which is so broad and general that any president could, as you say, any president could be charged with it.
So is it accurate to describe the impeachment? Because I don't think a lot of people even understand how this works. But on a very surface level, that what the House did is almost like a grand jury.
That's right.
And then it's passed over to the Senate. Now, can they continue to add new things? For instance, this Lev Parnas stuff, which I find interesting at best. But can they continue to evolve the charges?
Well, they can add new evidence of the original charges, but they can't add new charges. Without going through the impeachment process in the House. And, that's so Lev Parnas would be a hard case, because to the extent he's alleging something different, that may require going back to the House. To the extent that he's simply allegedly adding evidence to what's already been charged, then it probably wouldn't have to go back to the House. But, these are issues that would have to be determined by the House and the Senate, because the Constitution doesn't lay out the procedures. It just says the House shall be the sole judge of impeachment and the Senate shall be the sole judge of conviction or acquittal.
And what is the role of the Chief Justice?
No one knows. It's more than symbolic. I mean, he's put there only in case of presidential impeachments. Now, you can argue one of the reasons he's there is because the president pro temp of the Senate is in the line of succession with the president, so he shouldn't be there. But I think there's another reason. I think they wanted to add a judicial element to so important a job as removing a duly elected president. So I think the Chief Justice has some role to play, but what exactly it is, nobody is sure.
What are the things that we should be watching for, Alan, from both sides? What are the things that will show us one way or another which way this is going?
Well, I think the questions from the senators and the questions from the House managers, I'm looking forward to those questions already. The media, and some in the media, particularly in the hard left media, are predicting that I will be devastated by the questions. I assure you, I'm going to be very well prepared for any question that's asked me. I've argued 250 appeals over a 50-year period. I've never been asked a question during that period of time that I wasn't prepared for, and I intend to be prepared for the questions here. Whether my answers suffice or not is going to be up to the senators, but I will be prepared.
So are you going to be testifying, or are you going to be advising? Because you're not.
No, I'm going to be arguing. I'm going to be making the argument on the constitutional issue.